Are Americans stupid? I saw this thumbnail and I thought I had to watch this. It's called What Our Americans Don't Understand About Europe by Sabine Hossenfelder. And she's actually a really intelligent person. So let's hear what she has to say. It's obviously clickbaity, but
I've noticed an increasingly negative attitude of US Americans to Europeans and the other way around. It makes me sad because I think there's much to admire in both America and Europe. So today I want to talk a little about what I think is going on and what we have in common and what not. A lot of the US-European kerfuffle is friendly, and you find it in memes like "the European mind can't comprehend this," posted by Americans, featuring SUVs,
this one's real. This one's real and it sucks.
highway junctions, or oversized meals and drinks. In return, we have the retaliation. The American mind can't comprehend this, with the metric system, walls of public bathroom stalls that have gaps at the bottom, and garbage separation.
these are
Speaking
annoying.
of garbage, in case you missed it, 2 months ago, New York City introduced garbage bins. My European mind can't comprehend this. Of course, the American-European rub isn't a new thing. Georges Clemenceau, who was Prime Minister of France more than a century ago, said, "America is the only nation in history which miraculously has gone directly from barbarism to degeneration without the usual interval of civilization."
After a long day of doing these dumbass taxes, this is the best video to come into, man.
According to the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, the 100% American is 99% idiot. And Winston Churchill allegedly said that Americans can always be trusted to do the right thing once all other possibilities have been exhausted. Americans haven't been any friendlier to Europeans. The American comedian Jackie Mason quipped that England is the only country in the world where the food is more dangerous than the sex. Bette Midler declared that when it's 3 o'clock in New York, it's still 1938 in London. The American author and journalist P.J. O'Rourke said that you can always reason with a German. You can always reason with a barnyard animal too, for all the good it does. All good fun. But we also have many Europeans who think Americans are just stupid to accept living in the conditions that they do. That judgment has become especially pronounced since the first Trump presidency. And I'm laughing at Trump supporters. People that stupid shouldn't be allowed to vote. That's a quote from a
lot of people in Europe are still really left-leaning in some sense. It's changed just recently, but for a long time it's been like that, even post the US in some sense. And like I grew up in Europe. I've been in Europe for 30 years. I'm now in the US, and I tell you, the misunderstanding between these two areas is very large. They don't understand each other. It's crazy. It's really, but these memes are hilarious. I hope they continue not understanding each other, because these memes are great, man.
young Dutch person. I can tell you from my own experience that among the Europeans I know, this attitude is extremely common. You don't have to take my word for it, because by the blessing that's YouTube, we have footage of a young American who asked Europeans what they think of Americans.
Are you also German?
Yes, I am.
And in Germany, you feel like German people have a positive view of Americans? Or
Not really.
No,
I think
okay, so more negative.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you feel that there's been a change at all in terms of how Americans are viewed, like in the last 10, 15 years?
I think so, yes. Especially due to the Trump and the Tea Party things happening. It got more polarized, and that made it more negative in my view.
This is from before the recent US election, but I don't think the situation is much improved since. In return, many Americans likewise think Europeans are stupid to accept living in the conditions that they do. An opinion that seems to be mostly based on the economic superiority of the United States, or the higher income you can make in some professions, or the high taxes we pay in Europe. I encounter this attitude on Twitter all the time. The reason this makes me unhappy...
It really is all the same arguments all the time. And some of them have validity, but A lot of it is come from very little understanding, from people who have never lived in the other place. Really, that's what it is
that it presumes people in other countries must share our values.
Yeah. Also, I really think that there's pros and cons to both places, and if you were to blend the best of both, it would be a super country. Really, because there's great coming from Europe and from many traditions instilled in Europe, many work-life balance is better, things like this. But then the growth and the ability to I guess speak your mind in some sense here in the US is also incredibly freeing in some sense. There's a lot of good in both worlds, really, really. And well, of course, some bad too, right? The bureaucracy in Europe is absolutely horrendous, and life is getting more difficult in both countries, in both Europe and the US. Yeah, I wish we could learn from each other instead of just hating on it. It was just becoming enemies, and it's dangerous for the US. It's dangerous because the US is being seen so badly by many countries these days, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So
I've lived for some years in the United States, and I believe that Americans just have different values than Europeans.
Yeah.
We each have a different idea of what makes for a good life, and it makes no sense that we try to impose our values on each other. Have a look at this podium discussion. Can you spot the American among the Swedes? Somewhat more seriously, many Americans, for example, think of freedom as individual autonomy, guns being left alone by the government, and being able to say what they want without limitations. This is why they're skeptical of the idea to make health insurance mandatory, don't think much of social welfare programs, and constantly complain about censorship.
I think Europeans have a great say when they say the healthcare situation in the US is retarded, because it is. Even Americans think that. Everyone was behind Luigi Mangione it's just whatever happened there was healthcare in the US is disastrous. That's it. Americans believe it, and so do Europeans. So we can agree on that at least, right?
They've grown up learning that if you want to be successful, you need to take risks. They've grown up learning that failure is a normal part of life and an opportunity to learn. They've grown up learning to value independence. Europeans, on the other hand, are more likely to associate freedom with social security.
Yeah.
They want to be free to pursue their interests without having to worry about, say, being indebted for the rest of their life because they wanted to study physics, having to ask for donations to pay their cancer treatment, or getting shot at the mall. In Europe...
Oh my God, she's digging, man. Another thing that's worrisome about certain countries in Europe, and it's not all of them, but some of them have such high taxes, it's almost like a kindergarten state in which it's basically you grow up with this idea the government takes care of everything, and your mobility as a person is then limited just mindset wise, right? You start thinking that, okay, I don't actually have to, you just become less able. And people don't understand the psychological aspect of this. You become less able as a person, less willing to go further, less willing to overcome obstacles. And in the US, it's an extreme, right? For people who are poor, and people can really go to the depths of poverty, versus in a place like Denmark, it's the opposite in some sense. You have help if you need it. But they both have pros and cons again.
We tend to see universal healthcare, tuition-free education, and unemployment benefits as the basis of individual liberty. We accept higher taxes and regulations as protections from systemic risks like poverty or illness, and most of us agree that one person's free speech ends when it endangers another person's safety or dignity. We've grown up learning...
Yeah, but it's gone beyond that in Europe. It's not just when it endangers someone's dignity, okay, fine. But in some cases, people are getting arrested for memes and stuff. It's ridiculous, man. It's not anymore. Like it's too far now. It's too far. It used to have some sense before, but now it's too far. I guess they were in Europe. They were less willing to offend people, and they were willing to step back. And the U.S. is really, as you say, what the hell you want, really. I mean, it doesn't happen on the street. No one's just yelling at stuff at each other every day. That's not how it is. But you're more able to speak your mind and to have an opinion and to believe it's right. But at the same time, you respect that the other person also has an opinion that might be different than yours, and you will protect their right to have that. That's the idea, right? Which I admire that idea, honestly.
That bad fortune can hit anyone. We've grown up learning that we're stronger together.
Yeah.
We've grown up learning to think before acting. Yes, these are terrible stereotypes, and I apologize profoundly to all Americans and Europeans who feel misrepresented, which will be all of you, I guess, because I think we all have some sympathy for both perspectives. Like, just among you and I agree that our taxes are too high. But by my own experience, I think that on average, these stereotypes are largely true. I believe that our different values go back to our different historical trajectories. The USA was built by rebels who fled from tyranny. Then they ended up in the awkward situation of needing a government for people who don't want to be governed. That's basically still the situation today. Europe, on the other hand, had kings and monarchs for millennia, and then saw the emergence of a strong labor movement, which only grew stronger after the First and Second World War. This is why we have such strong labor unions, which prevent a lot of the financial exploitation that's possible in the United States. And these fundamental differences reflect in the way that we deal with business developments. Americans tend to think that Europe's overregulated and slow and too risk-averse. They're right. And Europeans tend to think that in the United States, rich people make the poor poorer by burning money in overly risky investments. They're also right. A good way to see how these cultural differences result in economic differences is this graph. It compares labor productivity in the EU with that in the US.
Crazy.
You can see that the productivity per capita in the EU has grown far less in the past decades, and I understand that Americans are proud of their achievement. But if you dig into the details, the reason for the discrepancy is that Europeans on average work fewer hours.
Yeah.
You can see this if you normalize this productivity by the number of hours worked, then the curves look almost identical.
Yeah, there's also a thing in the US where everything is about growth, right? And that is the measure of success. Growth and expansion all the time. It doesn't matter what cost it is. And in Europe, that's what I meant with a work-life balance. It really, there's more to life than just constant growth. It's more conservative in that sense. And I think in some sense, you sometimes win in the long run with that mentality, and the other one is basically going like this, right? So she's so intelligent, man. I love watching her videos. If you like it, go subscribe to her so far.
Does this mean? I think it means that Europeans don't care a lot about the GPU. At least I don't. If an American comes to me boasting about how high the US GPT is, or how many billionaires are Americans, or how many big companies are owned by Americans, all I can say is, well, and what do you get out of it? Are you happy that you made the rich people even richer? If the answer is yes, that's fine with me, and I respect that. But it's not a system that I would feel comfortable in, and I hope that you can respect that too. And that basically is the message of this video. I wish that we all had more respect for how people in other cultures choose to live their lives. Americans aren't stupid because they voted for Trump, and Europeans aren't stupid because they pay high taxes. We just do things differently. I very much admire the American entrepreneurial spirit, their willingness to take risks, and their independence. But I also think it's good that we don't all do things the same way. I follow the news both in Europe and America, and that's become so much easier since I use Ground News. So let me tell you something about them. Ground News is a news platform that collects and summarizes news which has been published all over the world. Not only do they collect all articles on the same story in one place and give you a quick summary, they also give you a lot of extra information that you don't find in the standard media. And it's really saved me so much time same. Take, for example, the recent news that the US has terminated support for Ukraine's energy grid restoration. You see right away that this news has been much more covered by the
I'm so invested in this ad, man. Can you tell? I want to know this story now.
political right than by the left, which is really curious, isn't it? You also get a factuality rating for each news item, and it tells you whom the media outlets are owned by and where the news has appeared. You can also switch between a focus on US and EU news. Ground News also has this great feature called Blind Spot. This tells you which news has been almost exclusively covered only by one side of the political spectrum. And of course, I have a special offer for you.
Yeah,
That's a
it's here.
40% discount on the
Go get
Vantage plan, which gives you access to all their
Right here,
features.
behind my face.
All you need to do is use my link ground.news/Sabine or use the QR code so they'll know I sent you. I really think that Ground News is onto something with their news overview, so go and have a look. Thanks for watching.
All
See
right.
you tomorrow.
Sorry, that was a long ad, man. Go follow her. She's great, honestly. She comes up with the best stuff. Let's read some comments here, okay? It's important, always. People in the comments have better things to say than anyone. As someone who has lived in 5 countries in the world, France, Greece, Japan, Sweden, and the USA, I think people are stupid everywhere. They're just stupid in different ways. Oh my God. I'm a Brit married to an American. My observation is that English as a common language masks how different the two cultures really are. Culturally, the UK has much more in common with France and Denmark, and to a lesser extent, Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden. The other thing is that America is a big country and has maybe 5-ish countries worth of culture in it. That's absolutely true. New England and parts of the East Coast are more European in outlook than other parts of the states I've visited. Yes, this is definitely true. It's a massive place. Some people forget how big it or how long it takes to drive from one end of Texas to the other. Well, I'm not in Texas, but it's long. Regarding the comment about too much tax, I live in Austria, which I think has a slightly higher tax burden than Germany. I'm self-employed, meaning that instead of getting a sum of money every month from my employer with all deductions removed, I pay my own deductions every month. I have 2 distinct deductions. One is income tax, the other one is health insurance. Now, I used to live in the USA. I made more money than I do here, but I somehow ended up with less in my bank account every month. 2 things caused this. 1, the cost of living is cheaper here, and I didn't live a particularly expensive area before I left. 2, I don't pay anything like as much for my basic health needs. I'm not unhealthy as I did in the US. My doctor here doesn't ask for a copay while I pay my health insurance directly myself, so I know how much it costs. It's less than the amount I had to pay to make up the difference that my US employer wouldn't pay. When I need the health service here, it's amazing. In the US, it was dreadful. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If the US could fix its one major issue with this, which is healthcare, it would be very difficult to speak against the US in terms of the EU. There would be other things like obviously culture and history and charm of the buildings, things like this. I get it, but man, this is one major setback of the US: healthcare. You pay so much for it, you still pay money out of your pocket. It's terrible. It's terrible. And if you're caught randomly by a mistake, you break your arm, whatever, I don't know, whatever accident, you get cancer, and you don't have health care, you're done. You're done. Originally it was good-spirited ribbling, but now it's more serious, as the example of the EU and Canada is an uncomfortable reminder that there are alternatives to the dog-eat-dog with the billionaires and oligarchs want for us, blah, blah, blah. Everyone is stupid except for me. I can't be stupid. That's true. Very smart. Smart man. In Brazil, we pay European-level taxes while relying on an American-style social security system. Meanwhile, our politicians and judges continue to amass significant wealth. Okay, so everyone in the US and everyone in Europe, we need to stop fighting. At least we're not Brazil. Stop fighting. We're doing better than Brazil, it seems. I feel sorry for them. They got good beaches. And a lot of other things. To be fair, any American that lives outside of New York can't comprehend the lack of garbage bins there. Oh man, there's so many good comments. I've always thought like we really should have more respect for each other. I don't know why we're bickering so much, man. I think it's just been too much news of left and right, too much split there, and everyone's having a hard time, so divisive, even in the countries themselves. Like, the problem is not American values, but corporate propaganda. Okay, I see it beginning to influence a few European countries. In the 70s, Milton Rockich, I think, an American, showed that valuing altruism over personal control is sane, that many Americans don't get this. But that insanity has basically gone ballistic by propaganda. They try to do the opposite of what Rockich tries to do. There was a time when Americans had very inexpensive education, a solid social security system, and healthcare was inexpensive. Yeah, that would be great. Even if it was private, as long as it was inexpensive, right? It's called the 1950s to 60s, yeah. The military-industrial complex and the banks, I guess, have turned things into an oligarchy. Americans are not free or in control. The oligarchy is. Yeah, corruption in the end comes for anything that is good. And that goes for Europe and the US. And I wish we had more compassion for each other to know that we're all having a hard time right now simply because corruption is allowed to flourish. Immorality, usury, interest-based systems, unsustainable money. These are the things that trouble us today. Nothing more, really. So, I live in the US, I'm European, so I guess my fellow Americans and Europeans, you're dumb, and so am I.